Hello and welcome back. This time around, we're going to be talking about compositing. Compositing is a broad term that covers a lot of the things that happen in Photoshop. When you think of the verb form of Photoshop, as the news or other people like to use, that image is photoshopped, or I'm going to Photoshop you out of that picture because I don't like you, whatever the term is, it's usually referring to a form of compositing. Compositing is basically the taking multiple things and making something out of it. So if we describe a type of a rock as a composite rock, that means it's formed from different rocks. If it's a composite material, then again, it's formed of different materials that make up something new. If we use that as a verb to composite something, that means in our class to combine two or more images to make a single picture. So this is from a quick Google search. You'll find those definitions easily. So this is common terminology. When we're talking about combining images, we're compositing them, or we're creating a composite, or we are going to composite something together. This goes for both adding something to a photo or removing something sometimes. You may have that person who is no longer in favor and you want to remove them out of your photos. And that happens. A few years ago, there was kind of a spoof video, the boyfriend removal tool in Photoshop. I think it was an April Fool's thing, but you could easily and quickly remove an ex-boyfriend out of your photos using this Photoshop tool. It isn't too far from reality. There are some content aware tools that do some similar things, but we're going to talk mainly about modifying photos and creating something new by adding elements from different pictures. Going through a little bit of the history of compositing, this has been going on for quite a long time. As you can see in these images, we have the President Abraham Lincoln, and it's just a composite of his head put on someone else's body. Actually, another politician, John Calhoun, who was in a flattering pose and setting, and someone at some point, for some reason, decided that Lincoln's head would look better on that picture than his. That was done pre-Photoshop, obviously, so there were methods to do this a long time ago, and compositing images is not anything new whatsoever. Here's another photo. This one is of General Ulysses S. Grant in front of his troops at City Point, Virginia during the Civil War. It was found later on that this is a composite, obviously, as you can see from the images on the right, of someone else on a horse and the camp in the background, and Ulysses S. Grant standing next to a tent. So obviously a composite there. If you look close at the image, you can start to see that, oh yeah, it doesn't quite work in that image. Back in those days, before everyone was conditioned to accept that, yes, Photoshop is a part of life, that was a realistic composite, and it took a little bit of detective work for somebody to figure this out. This image right here, at a glance, you may not notice a huge difference between the two, but there are some curtains in the background, and there's another member of the photo over on the right. You can see that it was photographed with a person missing. This isn't an uncommon thing nowadays. I have friends and family that I shoot family portraits for occasionally, and there's always somebody who either, for one, didn't look good and didn't want to be in the picture until they were ready, and so they missed it, or I'm not a patient photographer. Maybe that's the problem. But anyways, someone's missing from the picture. Either they're not present, or they're traveling, or just gone, or whatever the case, and so we'll leave a gap for them and really easily clone that person in afterwards. So that's not uncommon, and it was done back in those days too, and you can see from this image that it doesn't look out of place for him to be in there. Getting into something a little bit more serious is reporting images. So this image is a journalistic photo from it's a British soldier in Iraq, and he is obviously directing these civilians to take cover. After the fact, it came out afterwards that the photographer doctored this image. As you can see from the images on the bottom, the top image is the doctored image. The bottom are the two, those are original photographs, and they were merged into a composite to make for a more compelling image. The photographic composition of the top image is better, and as a photographer wanting to showcase something, you want the image to be as compelling as possible. The two bottom images are less compelling visually from just a compositional standpoint, not looking at the subject matter or content-wise, but compositionally, the composite of the two is a more compelling image. However, that's a big no-no when you're talking about journalistic integrity and things like that. You want to avoid that sort of thing. Next up, I threw this one in just for fun. You can see punctuation matters, and this is not so much a Photoshop thing, but just be aware of what you're doing. I'll show you some really bad examples of Photoshop disasters that are bad composites. But if you look close at this image, I'm not going to tell you what right away. It's not so much the photo or the image in this, it's the text. Look close to that and you might see. You may have heard of this one before. It's made the rounds on the internet. But again, this isn't so much Photoshop as just being aware of what you're doing. All right, so now when we talk about compositing, there are a few elements that make up the process of creating a composite. And one of those is smart objects. So smart objects are used in making composites, among other things. There's no set recipe that this is what makes a composite image, other than you're just combining multiple things together. But one way that you can accomplish that with the least amount of hassle on your end and getting the best results possible is to use smart objects. Smart objects, if you haven't seen that in your reading yet at this point, are simply layers or groups of objects, layers combined together into a non-destructive unit. So think of a zip file on your hard drive. If you take a group of images, drop them in a folder, and then archive that folder or zip that folder, then you have basically a new file that contains a bunch of other files. They can be all different kinds of files. Smart objects, that's one way that they're similar. So they're like a layer that also can archive other images or other files and all into one group. So that's one thing that they do. Another thing about those is that they're non-destructive in certain regards. If you look at the bottom bullet point, it says you can't alter pixel data. And in that way, they are non-destructive, absolutely, because you really can't modify the pixels of them whatsoever. You can apply adjustment layers or transformations or all kinds of other non-destructive things, and that's not going to affect the pixels. They're protected within that smart object, kind of like an encasing folder would in a zip. So it works well for vector data. So you can drop an Illustrator file within your Photoshop document and still retain the vector information within it. You can edit one smart object, and as long as it's linked properly, you can set it up where, let's say you're doing a website mockup, and the company that you're working for, their logo is repeated throughout the page. You can update one instance of that logo. For example, if the client says, hey, let's change this color just a little bit. You do that, and rather than having to go find a ton of instances of that through 100 different layers, that's going to be a hassle. If you do it with a smart object, it can update all other instances of that smart object instantaneously. Super helpful, super fast when you're doing iterative design like that. You can also implement smart objects with low-res images or placeholder graphics in a design. Say you're working with a team of people and you haven't received all the content yet. You can create your mock-up or a finished design, practically finished, and then once you get the high-res content, photographs from the photographer or asset department or whatever, then you can just replace those really quickly as linked images in smart objects. Great ways to use that. So if you are looking at a simple layer, like in this picture below on the right-hand side on the bottom, there's layer window, and then there's one above that, layer 1 underneath the red arrow. Any regular old raster pixel-based layer, you can right-click on that and choose Convert to Smart Object. And that's going to transform that into a smart object. You can make a folder. So I can take a group of layers and put them together in a folder, a layer group, I should say. And I can do the same thing, convert to smart object. And all those layers are going to go into a single smart object. And then I can do all kinds of things to that smart object, like apply filters or transformations or whatever else. Now, the next thing that I just mentioned is you can apply filters to smart objects. And that's a great thing. It's super helpful because filters are traditionally a destructive thing that you would do to your image. So if I have an image layer here, like layer 1, you see on the left-hand side, I've applied a bunch of filters to that. Gaussian blur, for example, is going to blur all the pixels of my image. And let's say I apply a Gaussian blur to a photo, and it's, for whatever purpose I'm going to do that, it's going to be a destructive edit. It's going to literally modify the pixels of that layer. Sometimes I've been known to go a little crazy with filters and do too much of an effect, and I want to back that off a little bit. I can really easily and quickly double click on each of those smart filters and adjust the settings of that at any point in time. So it's very non-destructive. It allows you a lot of flexibility in your workflow above and beyond just the simple Control Z or Command Z or going back in your history panel. So definitely Whenever you are working with filters, I highly recommend converting for smart filters. The way you do that is there's two different ways. One is to click on the filter menu and choose convert for smart filters. If you look at where that red arrow is pointing, the icon on the thumbnail of that layer looks identically to that of a smart object. And that's because a smart filter and a smart object, basically it's the exact same thing. If I convert to a smart object, then it's going to be converted for smart filters and vice versa. So it's the same thing. There's no difference. It's just that when you apply a filter to a smart object, it is a smart filter. All right. Lastly, we're going to cover adjustment layers briefly and layer masks in a few steps on the next few slides. Just as an example, if you look over there at the image on the right, the left side is the unmodified layer. The right side is an adjustment layer, a hue saturation adjustment layer being applied to it. And this is a pretty dramatic edit, but it can show you what's done. And again, that's a non-destructive edit. I'm not doing an adjustment, I'm doing an adjustment layer, which comes with its own properties that I can go in and remodify at any point after the fact, non-destructively. I can copy and paste that. I can apply it to a whole layer group. I can do all sorts of things, including modify the layer mask so that I can selectively apply that adjustment to just a portion of the image. Being able to selectively apply adjustments and mask things is super important in compositing, because in order to make things realistically fit into a scene, you may be pulling a person out of a photo where it's kind of sunny and placing them into a scene that's kind of cloudy. Being able to apply adjustments selectively to the person to make them blend into the new scene, the lighting, the contrast, the color temperature, all those things is going to be different. And being able to do that with adjustment layers that are non-destructive is huge. It's super important. And being able to apply layer masks to make your selection and refine it and make changes after the fact is, again, super important. So you definitely want to be in the habit of always using layer masks and adjustment layers. Those are some of the things that I highly recommend doing, especially if you want to score well on your creative project. Be sure that you're using layer masks and adjustment layers. All right, so in the next few slides, I'm going to show a few images that I stole from Adobe's website. This is a simple tutorial on making composites. I'll post the link for you guys later. But what I want you to just watch through, I'm just going to breeze through this really quick, much faster than if I were actually demoing the technique. But you can see in this case, just a kind of a creative composite that somebody made of a swimming pool with a guy surfing a wave in the swimming pool. And it's you know, unrealistic in terms of, we know that that doesn't actually happen, but the composite looks like, realistic enough that it passes as a composite in terms of just creating a creative image. So here's how you go out doing something like this. The basis of many of the easiest and best looking composites, the best results typically turn out when you're using just two simple layers and a layer mask. Now this one gets a little bit more in depth than that, but you can apply this same concept to all sorts of things, and I highly recommend playing around with this. I mentioned before compositing a face into a group. This is, again, I have kids. I have 4 kids, and shooting a family picture of my own family is impossible to get everyone to smile. So again, I'll review this later on, but shoot as many pictures as it takes to get all the kids smiling, even if it's just one kid in one picture and one kid in another. Layer those images and then do the exact same techniques that I'm about to show you by masking out the unsmiley faces, and then you just let the same smiling faces show through, so you have one final image where at least everybody's smiling, even if it's not real life. Okay, so again, we have the pool layer and the surfer layer. 2 untouched photos at this point. Next step is a layer mask. So we can do a few different things to make a selection, and we're going to hide all the areas of the pool photo to show through where the water needs to be in the surfer. And in this case, we see the properties panel. Now, I'm not covering how to do refine and mask here in this lecture, but you guys should all be able to cover that in the reading and exercise files. But the result is that you're left with this masked out area where the other image simply shows through, where it's now transparent. Take a look at the layers panel here where it shows the pool layer, and you'll see that big white rectangle with the black pool area that's been masked out. That can be done in any number of ways with all sorts of selection tools, as simple as just using the paintbrush or the marquee tool or whatever to make a selection and then fill it with black. that's going to hide the areas in that pool layer and let the surfer layer show through. Any good composite takes a lot of refinement too. You're not going to typically get good results by just really quick masking something out and calling it a day. It takes refinement. So in this case, that pool layer is masked out further to allow a little bit more of the splash to show up in the image, and refined further and further to blend some of the spray with the background and so on and so forth. So again, this is not a complex thing. This didn't even require any adjustment layers or any filters or transformations at all. It's just using 2 layers and a mask. So compositing isn't necessarily something complex. The best tip that I can give you too for compositing, for getting realistic and accurate results, is to choose images that are already similar to each other in lighting and tone. Otherwise, you're going to end up spending a lot of time and not necessarily get the best results. Having a good visual eye for your images, your source images, is going to help you out a lot. I gave an example earlier about putting a person from a sunny photo into a cloudy scene, and it can be done. It's just going to be more work than necessary sometimes. You get much better results if you're just choosing a person from a cloudy scene to put into a new cloudy scene, or whatever the case is. Similar lighting conditions are going to be easier to work with. That said, sometimes you don't have a choice. It's extremely critical that you have a really keen eye for detail on compositing, because naturally we look at photos and we look for inconsistencies, or maybe not actively, but passively we are aware of inconsistencies. For example, if light is striking someone in one place and you put them in a scene where the light's coming from the other direction, it's going to stand out. The sun is not shining on the right side of this person's face. So be aware of that. You may need to take steps to avoid that by choosing a different photo or flipping the person the other direction so the light is coming from the right side. Whatever it is, just be aware of details like lighting and shadows. Those are going to be the biggest tells, aside from masking and placement of your objects. Here are a few more examples, just to maybe give you some ideas. This is also from that Adobe Help page tutorial, just to give you some ideas of trying stuff out. These are all 4 really, really simple composites made using 2 images and a layer mask. Nothing complex about any of these. So you can try all this out on your own, and I recommend definitely doing that. Don't just listen to my lecture. Open up Photoshop, go along with it, find your own files, and try this stuff out on your own.